when you see the initial phases of homeschooling, it actually began as uh, an alternative solutions for people who didn't sort of fit in the central curve, right? People who were acting, people who were, above the curve or below the curve, that set of people. And later on, there were sort of ideological issues wherein, schools were kind of looked at for indoctrination and things like that. And, another group sort of came out of the whole school system. But in the last 10, 15 years, especially in places like California, a lot of sort of parents of children who do okay in schooling, right? They're not really struggling, they get by, but they've started pulling out their children and looked at homeschooling because they know the system isn't working for them.
Right.
Could you sort of elaborate on this a bit?
Yeah, I mean that's definitely true that, if you look at the history of homeschooling, it definitely was a fundamentalist Christian movement initially, right? That, the government, we don't want the government indoctrinating our children. We don't want the government telling us what to do. We want to freely teach our religion, all of that, right? So that's where it really started. But you're right, sort of, it definitely, there's been a shift in the last, I mean, I've been homeschooling for 11 years, so it started
Mhm.
before then. But there has been more of a shift to, okay, it's not necessarily for religious reasons. And I believe that some of the like polls and studies that have been done say that that is not the main reason that most people cite
Right,
anymore.
right,
Right. Most people cite that they want a better education for their child, or that school was not a good fit. That's usually like one of the top answers now.
right.
And like you said, particularly I would say on the coasts, right, on the East Coast and the West Coast, where people do tend to be trailblazers. A lot of people are homeschooling because, the school is not a good fit. They're seeing the failings of the school system. I mean, so many reasons now. I mean, you have school
Right,
shootings, you have bullying,
right,
you have that programs are going away, right? Gifted programs, music programs, all of that. So there's less going on. There's more teaching to the test. There's more rote learning. There's more.
Mhm.
It's just and it's hard also, like you said, they're teaching to the middle, which I think you have to. And I don't like to bash teachers because teachers have a really hard job. I
Right.
have trouble on some days homeschooling my two kids, let alone having 30 in a classroom. I don't even know how they do it. It's really difficult.
Right.
And I think they would admit that it's difficult. It's difficult to accommodate everybody's
Right.
asynchronous learning. Um, and you have, some kids are ahead, some kids are behind, some kids are right on track, and how do you help all of them in the space of 45 minutes or a day if you're a grade school
Right.
teacher? It's really, really difficult.
Right.
So a lot of people are saying, well, oh, this is legal, homeschooling's legal. Oh, there's another way. Well, let me try this. And then
Right.
frequently what I hear from homeschooling families is, of course, when you start, it's a lot of trepidation, a
Right.
lot of how do I do this? I'm not a
Doubts. Right.
teacher, and we'll talk more about that, I'm sure.
Right.
Um, about those concerns, those fears, those myths that a lot of people have about homeschooling. Um, but once they get over that and they start seeing that
Right.
their child is thriving and learning,
Right.
then they're off and running, right? And
Right.
so we have people who have gifted kids, and maybe they're, like we said, bullying
Right.
or just some sort of learning disability or something like
Right.
that, and are not getting the attention they need.
One, the economics isn't really viable. Teachers aren't the highest paid jobs, unlike places like Scandinavia, number one. Number two is socially, teaching isn't really the glamorous, the most respected sort of occupation, right? You don't look at a doctor or a military person the same way you look at a teacher. And so they say like it's more of a social issue than just the system. The system is broken. They agree with that, but there are
Mm-hmm.
also other aspects which why US and India aren't ranking above other countries. What's your take on this?
That's interesting. I actually had not really heard of that or thought of that before. So I don't know that I have an opinion really about it.
Mhm.
But what's interesting is just because now, because of COVID,
Mhm.
I wonder what's going to become of that, because
True.
there are certainly, it's interesting. Two things are happening. You're seeing for sure lots of social media posts about, wow, teachers should be paid $1 million
Right.
because people are suddenly at home having to do virtual learning from home or some form of homeschooling.
Right.
Um, but but so will this result in more respect for teachers or more money? I don't know if
Yeah,
that's
right.
interesting. But on the flip side of that, as a board member for the Homeschool Association of California, I host homeschooling 101 sessions, and I've had to add sessions,
Mhm,
and I typically get maybe 20 or 30 people at a session.
mhm, mhm.
And a couple of days ago, I had 100 people.
Ah,
So
right, right.
clearly people are looking at what the restrictions or the rules are going to be this fall if schools do open,
Right,
and they're making the decision not to put their kid in, and
right,
homeschooling instead. So
right.
so we have that dichotomy that a lot more people will probably be homeschooling, and yet there is a greater appreciation for teachers.
So the idea was that expertise is sort of built into the specialization or expertise is built over years, right? Like teachers teach for 10, 15 years and they're able to handle children. That's a sort of mental barrier that parents get, like when they hear about homeschooling. How do you
Mhm.
see this?
Well, for sure. Okay, and this is one of the things that I do talk about with homeschoolers, or new homeschoolers and thinking about homeschooling. It is I think a myth that that, well, I'm not a teacher, so therefore how can I do this? And I do remind people that when your child was young, from age 0 to 5, you
Right.
naturally taught them without a credential, without a lesson plan, without without a teaching credential, all of
Right.
that, right? You were
Right.
still without any training. You were able to teach them to walk and talk and dress themselves and potty train them and teach them their
Hmm.
numbers and their colors and all of that, right?
Right.
And even just how to share and all these things, right? We just naturally teach our children, right? We
Hmm.
naturally work with them, that kind of thing, right? And
Hmm.
so, because I do hear parents saying, well, okay, yeah, I could do first grade, sure. Who can't, like, sort of teach first grade and first grade type things, right? But then what about high school? And I say, well, don't worry so much about that yet, because you're not there, right? Like, worry
Right.
about where you're at right now. Get the resources you need right now. And I remind parents that you don't have to do all of the teaching. And really, it's not even, I hate to even use the word teaching, because I feel like it's more facilitating or
Ah,
coming alongside your child. It's not like your child is this vessel that you're going to pour knowledge into,
right.
right?
Right.
It's a collaboration. It's
Hmm.
bringing your child to resources or doing things with them, alongside them. And if
Understood.
you're not up to that task, like if you don't like math, find another parent to step in, find
Ah,
an aunt, a grandparent, a neighbor, another homeschooler who maybe that's their thing, right? So maybe because, I mean, think about like how educated just people in general are today, or they have a speciality or something they're
right.
good at. So you can rely on other homeschoolers and share. I know of a big homeschool group that has like a science, Wednesday science group or something. I'm not sure what they call themselves, but
Uh-huh.
every Wednesday, this group of maybe 20 children got together every Wednesday,
Hmm.
and one parent would teach some sort of a science lesson. One of
Hmm.
the parents had gone on a ship to the middle of the plastic patch in the ocean for on a 6-week voyage.
Uh-huh.
Fascinating, right? And
Right.
all about plastic and conservation and recycling. And she did this whole lesson on that whole trip, right?
Hmm.
Where
Got it.
else would you where else would you get something like that? And
Right.
another parent did something on gardening, and another parent did something on dissections, and
Hmm.
that kind of thing, right?
Right.
So you don't have to just rely on your own knowledge, right?
Hmm.
You are
Right.
finding resources. If my kid was super into woodworking, well, I don't
Hmm.
want to woodwork. That's not my thing. So I would be looking on Meetup,
Right.
Facebook. I would be
Right.
trying to find a group of woodworkers and
Right.
join that group, or see if there's a mentor there for my child. If my
Right.
child was really into paleontology, again, not my thing, but I could find books about it. I could probably find a class about it. There's a wonderful resource called outschool.com that has classes on it that are live from teachers all over the world. They're usually, fairly inexpensive, and maybe I'd find a paleontology class on there, or maybe I would even contact my local college and see if there's a grad student who's a paleontologist, a future paleontologist who would maybe tutor or mentor my child. So
Got it.
there are lots of ways that you can bring knowledge to your child or get your child knowledge if this isn't your thing, right? This particular, subject is
Right.
not your thing.
Right. So
So I
if
think,
I oh sorry. So
no,
if
go
I
ahead.
think you're kind of putting it in this basket of the regular schooling system, you sort of outsource the whole package to someone, right? Where they bring in the expertise, they bring in the resources, and they sort of set everything up. Here, we're not saying that you need to do everything.
Yeah,
You need to be the facilitator who kind of brings in these resources and help the child, right? So
exactly.
it
And there's
requires that active participation.
It really does. It really does. So you do need to be active because you need to be thinking about, what is your kid into? In fact, I usually recommend this, that you also talk to your kid because you've got sort of your basic subjects, math, history, science, whatever. But then what else? What else does
Right.
your kid want to learn about? Or even within the realm of history, for instance, schools have it all mapped out. This is when
Right.
we learn this. This is when we learn California history. This is when we learn U.S. history. This is when we learn ancient history, etc. But maybe you want to do it in a different order or go deeper, or whatever, right? So you can choose, especially if you know you're homeschooling long term and you have this, 12 years in which to cover all
Right.
these topics. You don't
Right.
have to go in the order that schools do.
Right.
Right. So you can pick and choose. What's your kid into right now? Oh, Egypt. Great. We're learning about Egypt. That's our history lesson for now.
Right.
So, the flexibility of it,
Mm-hmm.
because some people will even say, well, if you're just going to like hire a bunch of classes and things, why not just do school?
Mm-hmm.
Because I can pick, one class from out school and have a tutor from down the street for math, and
Mm-hmm.
I can teach economics because maybe
Right.
that's my thing. And
Right.
and my friend, we can do a co-op with some other people for PE, or so you have this flexibility. And if any one of those things is not working or has become boring, or your
Mm-hmm.
child has outgrown it for some reason, or just wants something different, you can just change. Whereas if your child's in a school, you can't,
Right.
right? You can't
Right.
change,
Got it.
because they're stuck. They're stuck with that teacher. They're stuck with that curriculum. They're
Right.
stuck with teaching to the test and all of that.
Right. 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 Understood. The part I have sort of doubts over is this concept of echo chamber, wherein the places you tend to go are the places you like and right? But whereas in a school, it's a sort of the only parameter is the 10-kilometer or 10-mile radius in which the school is located, and everybody from all sections of the society, come in and they study. So there's this sort of diverse sort of ecosystem which the school provides. That's something which I wanted to speak to you about. Do you feel that that diversity can be mapped into homeschooling?
It's interesting because if you think about like my local public school,
Hmm.
it's it's pretty. I mean, it's only going to pull from the people who live in this area.
Correct.
So
Correct.
if you live in a predominantly white area, you're going to
Hmm.
have a bunch of white kids. If you live in a predominantly Chinese area, you're going to have all
Hmm.
Chinese kids, et cetera, right?
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, that is just as sort of segregated as
Hmm.
homeschooling potentially could be if you're not exposing your children to, other cultures and people and experiences, right? So,
Hmm.
and again, and in that case, you're sitting in a classroom. I mean, sure, there are field trips. Really, how many field trips? Because
Right.
as a homeschooler, we went on one every week,
Hmm.
right?
True.
And we went on one every week with whatever homeschooler happened to show up. It wasn't just, oh,
Right.
some tight knit group of 5 families that only met together all the time.
The sort of beta version of homeschooling, or the evolution of homeschooling into unschooling, right? Wherein the
Mm-hmm.
child is put more in the center and his or her sort of exploratory urges are let loose and they can choose curriculums and things like that. There, do
Yeah.
you see the question of avoiding the broccoli, the sort of not going, like avoiding math altogether or avoiding history altogether? Do you
Mm-hmm.
see that happening somewhere?
What's interesting is when I first started homeschooling, I was not aware of unschooling at all.
Mhm.
So it took me a while until I really became more aware of what that was, and I was really fascinated. And I'm a little bit schooly, so that
Mhm.
in particular was really outside of my comfort zone, and what's it all about. And
Mhm.
so I did. I remember going to a homeschool conference many years ago, and listening to some graduated, maybe they were in their 19, 20, 21 age
Mm-hmm.
range. And it was like, we were radically unschooled. And so radically unschooled is truly, they did not use any curriculum ever.
Mm-hmm.
They only did class or something like that if they wanted to. So really radical unschoolers are super, super self-directed,
Mm-hmm.
child-led, right?
Right.
So this one student, or yeah, he was a student because he was going to college. So he was going to, so one of them had a job, one was going to college. So one was going to community college. And he said, I never learned how to write an essay. So I
Right.
went to class and I suddenly had to write an essay for my
Right.
class. So I went on the internet, thank Google, right? I went on the internet
Right.
and I learned how. And
Mm-hmm.
he wrote an essay and he got
Right.
an A.
Right.
And I was like, well, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Or he could have written essays his whole high school career
Mm-hmm.
and also known.
Right.
And I usually will tell this to parents. I said, for instance, like right now, if you and I had never learned how to write an essay,
Right.
we could pick it up pretty quickly because we've got more
Mm-hmm.
executive functioning. We're wiser. We probably have, better planning. And if we want it because we
Right.
need it for something,
Right.
we're going to learn, right? Like right now, I want to learn about homeschooling. So I'm going to attend this Homeschool 101 and I'm
Right.
going to soak up all the information because I want to know how to homeschool. So you're
Mm-hmm.
into it, right? You're
Right.
motivated and you're going to learn.
Right.
So that is sort of the idea of unschooling, that when you're
Mm-hmm.
motivated, you'll learn. There's a really great TED Talk. It's
Mm-hmm.
on YouTube by
Mm-hmm.
Sir Ken Robinson, and it's just
Ah,
5 or 6 minutes, and it's
I've seen
called
that.
Changing
Mm-hmm.
Education Paradigms, right? And
Profound.
it's beautiful. It talks about why the school system got started in the first place. And when you really
Mm-hmm.
look at that, it's hard to deny it. It's hard to
Right.
deny that that is not true. That it's
Mm-hmm.
assembly line, and it was to make sure that everybody had a similar education so they could go work on an assembly line,
Right. Right.
in a
True.
factory.
Right.
That
True.
was why it was done. And we're
Right.
so ingrained. We're so ingrained in that way of thinking,
Right.
you know?
Right. Right. Uh, Coming to this part of homeschooling, and this again, parents who are relatively new to this or feel a bit jittery about it, really want to try it out, but they have this fear that I want to try it out, I'm going to give it my best, but what if I'm not able to succeed? Do I have a backup plan? If I go back to the school after a year or 2 years, will they accept me? Now
Yeah.
in India it's a bit mixed. Here schools do accept, but they ask you to take a test to make sure that you're eligible for that. How does
Right.
it work in California? Do they take you back in case
Yeah.
if you want to go?
So it depends on the age. So for grade school, it's kind of no different than if you moved from one state to another within the states.
Uh-huh.
You would just enroll your child and they would just take them. They would just, oh, your child is 7, they're in first grade or second grade, right? So
Ah.
so that's, but they might. I mean, it's not universal, but they might do testing. But
Mhm.
usually it's not to verify that your child knows something. It's more just, oh, should we place them in the upper reading group or the lower reading group? It's more
Got
about
it.
that
Got
than
it.
verifying that you taught your kid something, right? So
Mhm.
the grade school levels, really
And
no
this
no
we're talking
problems
about in
whatsoever.
private schools.
Yeah. So well, I mean, private schools, they want your money, so they're going to take your kid no matter what. so,
Right.
so yeah, so
Right.
that's not a problem. But then the only time that we do caution people to be aware of this is that for high school, the way it works for high school, and you can imagine that this is true, that high schools have 4 years in
Right.
which to meet certain requirements by law, right? So
Mhm.
the public schools say that, hey, to graduate, you must have this, and this.
Right.
Okay. So if you homeschool for ninth grade, for instance, for the freshman year, and
Mhm.
then you want to enroll for the second year of the 4 year of high school
Right.
into a public school, they may not, you don't
Ah,
know until you try, they may or may
understood.
not, but they do not have to take your credits or
Mm.
accept what you did. Even like, let's say that even your child took an online algebra class
Mhm.
because it was under your private school affidavit in your small private school, they do not have to take those credits.
Understood.
So we do advise people that if you think your child's going back to school, just try to decide before ninth grade so that
Mhm.
you can do the entire 4 years at a school, so that you don't have that problem. You don't want your child to
Correct.
have to repeat algebra 1 for no
Right.
apparent reason. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
completely agree with so I have networked with a range of sort of administrators and schools here in India. And I completely agree with your take on the private school taking admission as long as they get the fee. But
Yeah.
there was also a profound insight that I got from the teachers. The teachers kind of are hesitant to take homeschoolers for a particular reasons. They say that the homeschoolers really don't get the classroom environment. They don't really respect the teachers, so to say. But when you dig in deep, you understand what that they're really saying. They're really saying that the rest of the classroom kind of gets into the mindset that the teacher is superior, so they'll talk to them in a certain way, they'll listen to them. Whereas the homeschool kid will just say, "Hey, I don't think that's right," right? And the teacher
Right? They'll
is
challenge them,
right,
right? Yeah.
right. So that was like kind of completely true from
That's
the teacher's side,
interesting. That's interesting. Right. They're not little mindless lemmings who do what
right?
I say, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's interesting. So here's an interesting thing. So my child who's about to graduate,
Mhm.
this last year of school, we actually enrolled him in a program called ROP, which in
Uh-huh.
America, it's like 2 hours a day.
Mhm.
It's actually through the school district, right? But it's sort of
Uh-huh.
an adjunct to the school. And ROP stands for Regional Occupational Program. And
Mhm.
so it is more of like a get you ready for a career, right?
Uh-huh.
And so the kids who are in public school have access to this if they like. And there's like medical assisting training. There might be training on automobile tech.
Mhm.
And then there's a computer science digital electronics program that my
Mhm.
son did. And it's 2 hours a day. So that was
Mhm.
mostly what he did for homeschool last year, was that class every
Uh-huh.
day, or this
Okay.
year, that class every day for 2 hours. And then of course it's just been sort of online these last couple of months, right?
Mhm.
But until it was online, he went there every single day for 2 hours. And this was the first time he'd been in a everyday regular class
Right.
with not other homeschoolers, but with public school children. And I
Uh-huh.
was really curious as to how he was going to do, right?
Mhm.
and and my child has no issues talking to adults in the same way he would talk to a child,
Right.
just as an equal, right? You're just
Right.
another person, you happen to be older,
Right.
right? So he's very confident in
Right.
talking with adults. And
Right.
so as he became more comfortable in class and started talking with the kids and whatnot, he'd tell me, oh yeah, I got out late today because I was chatting with the teacher. And I said, oh, does anybody else do that? And he's like, no. I'm like, isn't that interesting? Because you just see him as a person, whereas they're like, he's the teacher, he's
Right.
over there, right? Like you would be horrified if your parent
Right.
invited your teacher over for dinner,
Right. Right.
whereas we were like, hey, I run Nerf battles. So
Ah.
like, Nerf blasters, right?
Right.
Nerf blasters, that shit, right? So I run Nerf battles. We get like 100 people a month who come to Nerf battles, and we were inviting
Mhm.
him to our Nerf battles. And
Uh-huh.
most kids would be embarrassed as heck that
Right.
their mom was inviting their teacher to something that they go to.
Right.
And my kid thought it was great.
Mhm.
So yes, a very different attitude.
Right.
And I don't think my child ever challenged him or was rude or thought or
Right.
anything like that.
Right. Right.
But he just treated him like a
It's
human
just the
being.
sense of authority is not
Yeah.
there.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Like, yeah, exactly.
Right.
Hopefully your child never gets the sense that school is
Right.
this thing we do in the morning and
Right.
then it's done and we get to have fun and play.
Right.
Hopefully they
Right.
never learn that.
Right. Right.
Hopefully the learning they do is spread out throughout the day, on the
Mhm.
weekends, in the evenings, whenever it happens to take place, rather than this attitude of, oh, we have to do some learning thing now and it's 7 o'clock at night and mom, I just want to play video games.
Uh,
Hopefully you
right.
don't get into that
Right.
attitude of learning is this thing we do at the kitchen table and now we're done learning and we can go do other things, right?
Jyoti, that's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting what you just said. That kind of sounded to me similar to sort of adults like telling you, don't work, just to get a paycheck, right? If you hate your work so much that you want to run away and go home,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of mindset like comes from schooling, right? You hate schooling, but you need it so that you get a certificate. You hate work just so that you get a paycheck. So that
Right.
sort of mindset you can see in adults as well.
Yeah, exactly. It does follow you throughout your life. I hadn't really made
Right.
that connection, but that's very, very true, right?
Right.
That um it's this mindset that I have to do this unpleasant thing to get to the
Right.
fun thing, right?
Right.
Later. So hopefully school is not unpleasant, or at least as fun and interesting and engaging as you can make it. And when things are hands-on
Mhm.
and engaging, like a game rather than a worksheet. Now, maybe your kid loves worksheets. I mean, I know some
Mhm.
kids who do, right?
Right.
More power to you. Do worksheets if your kid loves them,
Right.
right? Again, it's about the kid. What are they
Mhm.
into? What do they like? What do they want to do?
Pleasure that we were able to exchange ideas and see that, across the world, we're pretty much in similar situations, right? It's
Very similar. Isn't it interesting? Yeah,
right,
homeschoolers I think are very similar all over.
right.
When I do my homeschool 101s, I
Mhm.
give really specific information about how to homeschool legally in California,
Mhm.
but the rest of it is completely applicable to
Right,
anyone, right?
right.
So, at the Homeschool Association of California Facebook page,
Mhm.
we have an events section,
Mhm.
and we always put the homeschool 101 events there,
Mhm.
and I'm doing one every 2 weeks over the summer. So if you have
Mhm.
people who are interested in hearing the perspective,
Right,
of homeschoolers in
right.
California and this type of information, they're
Right.
welcome to join. The
Wonderful.
sessions are free.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks a lot, Jeremy. This has been wonderful. I really enjoyed talking to you. I really enjoyed the insights that you brought in.
So yeah, definitely find me. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. This was a
Thank
total
you.
pleasure. I'm really happy to help. So it's
Thank you.
it's
Thank
great.
you,
Thank you
Jeremy.
so much. All
Thank
right, you
you.
take
Bye bye.
care.